This is the Todd Shapiro Show on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.
Okay, as we move forward, we've gotten to know this individual for quite some time, over the last year and a half. Very interesting guy with a very big brain, sometimes tough to understand. He's French-Canadian. Don't hold that against him. Please welcome back to the program Frank Dumas and his friend Rick Peterson from Suits and Boots in Peterson Capital in Edmonton. How you guys doing?
Doing very good, Todd. Thanks.
Good. Well, okay, let's start with Frank. Where are you, bud?
I'm in Montreal. Probably going to be in London for the election on Thursday. So I might have a surprise for you later this week. But still in Montreal for now, still working as much as we can before the holiday break, before everybody has their head somewhere else.
Tell us what you're working on, Frank.
Right now, we're actually working on something that we'd like to keep secret, but it involves quantum computers, and it involves a way to protect personal data against software that would be running on quantum computers.
And
that's
is this
a bunch of other things.
Through which company?
Through Zeu.
That's through Zeu.
Yeah, that's through Zeu. I'm trying not to mention it too much, because we're not a sponsor anymore. So.
No, I mean, but I know there are ZU shareholders and investors, hoping you guys go public at some point. Any updates on that?
We did refile an amended listing statement last week. So now it's in the hands of the CSC, and there was some short-term debt ratio that needed to be fixed. In our opinion, it is fixed right now. We'll see how they treat it and what they think. But they've we're not restarting from scratch. They had reviewed our file before, so let's see where it goes.
Excellent. And Rick, is it Peterson or Peterson? I just want to make sure I'm getting it right.
Thanks, Todd. No, it is Peterson. Thank you.
Of course. And Rick, tell us a little bit. First, tell us about just your sort of daytime job here at Peterson Capital and what it is that you guys do.
Well, I'm one of the old timers in the business, Todd. I've been around. I'm 65, and I've been around the business for about 30 years. And Peterson Capital is about 15 years old, and we simply support what we think are good, strong growth companies that are trading either on the TSX Venture or the TSX exchange, Todd. So our job is to help create wealth by supplying money and support for the companies that we think are going to be the ones that are financing Canada's future. And it's a fun job. We meet great people. And I ran into Frank through some colleagues about 2 years ago when I was one of the leadership candidates for the Conservative Party. And your introduction to him was excellent. He's on a different plane. He's a big picture thinker, and fascinating always to listen to Frank, listen to his ideas, and him being in the capital markets as well as interested in politics. It was a great mix, and we've certainly collaborated on things ever since.
Rick, it's funny now that rings the bell about your Conservative Party affiliations and run there. Now that then I didn't put the two and two together before, quite honestly. How are things? How is the climate in Alberta now compared to the rest of Canada? And are we still seeing this big protest against Trudeau and the government, or is there still a lot of, I guess, disgruntled Albertans?
I think the word, Todd, and Frank's got a good view of things from Quebec, but I think it's frustration, real frustration. And to put it into terms that might resonate across Canada, the issue we have in Alberta is Albertans have been through ups and downs in oil prices over the years. It's a cyclical business, and everybody understands that when the oil prices go down, you got to tighten up and hang in there and do whatever it takes to make it through the next cycle. But the fall in the price of oil in 2014, down from $100 to $20, and we're now back up to $50, has been compounded by other issues that are extremely frustrating for Albertans, and that is the inability to have oil that's produced in Alberta exported to markets outside of Canada. So what's happening is you see a number of laws that have taken place, or a number of things that have happened that are more or less in the hands of the federal government decisions they've made and laws that they've imposed on environmental controls and regulations that have, in the eyes of most Albertans, have choked off the ability of Albertans to export their oil. So it would be good example of Frank in Quebec. I think Frank is the biggest dam in Quebec. Is it still the Robert Bourassa Dam up in northern Quebec? It would be as if Quebec Hydro, all of a sudden the wires were chopped and Quebec Hydro couldn't export hydropower. Or it would be as if the auto plants in southern Ontario, if all of a sudden the car couldn't drive off those parking lots, or in Vancouver, if they shut down the port, put up a cement wall across English Bay and you couldn't get ships in there. So that's the frustration, Todd, here. It does fuel concerns of alienation. We're not at a full-fledged separatist movement yet, but it's a tinderbox of anger here right now. And to say otherwise, I think, would underestimate the pure amount of anger and frustration in Western Canada.
Rick Peterson is with us, Frank Dumas, and taking a little bit of a political twist here. We'll stay on this topic, and then we'll get to suits and boots in just a moment. I'm friends with Brett Wilson. He's been on the show many times and also discussed this very same frustration. What are your answers to those, Rick, if you wouldn't mind, about just about this sort of climate change fear and are Albertans ignoring climate change? I mean, is that the stereotype that we're grouping oil with climate change deniers? Is that part of the fear here?
Todd, that's a real good question, because if you're okay, I'm going to swing right into suits and boots on this because it answers your question.
I'm more than okay, man.
Okay, so Suits and Boots, a group of us, and Frank was one of the people that helped us get this going. In 2018, Todd, you may remember that Kinder Morgan pulled out of the Trans Mountain Pipeline in Canada, and a whole bunch of us said, "My gosh, this cannot happen. We have to stand up and do something." So we put together a loose coalition of friends, and Brett Wilson was one of the ones that once we got the thing up and going, was supportive of us. But it was basically the suits are the investment industry people like Frank and I and others, and our support of the boots in the resource sector. We wanted to come up with a grassroots movement that just pushed back a little bit against the opponents of the resource sector who have really been wiping the table, with their arguments. They just seem virtually unopposed. The large resource companies just have not done a good job of standing up and defending their interests. So we started this not-for-profit group, and if your listeners go to suitsandboots.ca, you can see the background of that. And to come back to your question, Todd, is the whole climate change issue, is it one that Alberta is isolated in? We actually, Suits and Boots, we've only got about 2 years under our belt here right now, but we've got about 5,000 people that subscribe to our emails across Canada, but we're in every single province, every single territory, in about 350 towns. And here's the unifying thing that is amazing on this, is 90% of the people who follow Suits and Boots accept and understand that climate change is something real that has to be dealt with, right? The discrepancies in that wide range as to what could be done, what should be done, what can be done, how bad is climate change, is the world going to end next year, or are we still, is this normal cyclical things? Those are areas that reasonable people can come to agree on. But we started at Suits and Boots 2 weeks ago. We started a cross-Canada tour to listen and to try to answer the question that you just posed me. We thought that instead of sitting here in Alberta, where I am, and screaming at social media and telling everybody how we're right and they're wrong, we actually went out and started listening and engaging with people. We went to Vancouver 2 weeks ago and met a whole bunch of people in Vancouver, a lot of whom we thought these guys are hardcore anti-resource people. And at the end of the day, there's agreement on 95% of, what we think needs to be done. Went to Toronto 2 weeks ago, and met some of the key fund managers in Toronto who manage money. Frank knows a lot of them, and what was fascinating there, Todd, is the money managers in Toronto in Bay Street are further ahead of anybody else that I've seen in Canada. The suits on Bay Street not only embrace climate change, they are not going to be allocating capital to companies that haven't eliminated or haven't done what they think needs to be done to address climate change in their business, to reduce the risk of climate change. That was an eye-opener. And then we went to Quebec. Missed Frank because Frank was traveling at the time, but we spent a full day in Montreal, met with pension fund managers, individual investment advisors, some small business groups, And it was fascinating. I think the island of Montreal, Todd, and Frank can tell you more, the island of Montreal is absolutely an area, it's a no-go zone for anything that has to do with oil resources. There's no doubt about that. But outside of the island of Montreal, tremendous support and understanding of the need of a healthy, robust oil and gas sector. And we got an asked an interesting question in Quebec, and I'll end my remarks here, but somebody said to us, Rick, because of Lac-Mégantic, or that disaster where 67 people died, why was the oil industry not able to get social license for pipelines after something that bad? And I don't know the answer to that. That's an interesting question, isn't it?
It's a very interesting question. And Rick Peterson, for someone who's sort of become a bit of a capital markets guy, over the last few years, way more than I have ever been, but also someone who's also focused on politics more than ever. The one thing that I always caution people is when you want immediate change, you can't forget about an entire industry, an entire workforce, and without transition. You can't forget about people, people here and now, people who still want to make a difference on this planet and want to make a right difference on this planet. They want to make things better, but there's still, you just can't ignore industries. And I ask people, well, imagine if your family was in a certain industry that you felt goes against what climate change is. And then the other hypocritical thing I always ask people is, what are you wearing? What are you buying? Well, look at the parts in your iPhone, the plastics on it, things that are made with oil. You can't just jump on the bandwagon of a big, social justice warrior cause just because it makes you look good at the water cooler talk that day. You got to do deeper dives. And that's what I always try to do here with this show, is look out for the now and look out for the future, not just think of the future. And I'm not afraid to say this either, and I know some are, but when I have a 16-year-old girl shouting it at me, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't listen to 16-year-olds on anything, so why am I going to listen about this? What I want to do is dig deeper. I want to find out who's going to be affected in the future, like my small children, a 4-year-old and a 10-week-old that I have brought into this world as of late. And maybe there's others. I haven't got those calls yet, though. And the other thing, Rick, is I just want everyone to understand it on an educational level. And I feel like we're not learning two sides of that education. And that's what frustrates me. Do you have a similar frustration?
I have a frustration, but I also, we also live in the political reality. And coming back to your comments on Greta. So a lot of us may look at that and kind of not roll your eyes, but look at a 16-year-old girl and, what does she know? But here is the issue, is that anybody who can lead a movement like that and create the crowds that we saw in Montreal and Toronto, something's happening, Todd, okay? And you don't have to drink the Kool-Aid all the way to the bottom of the glass. But you got to understand that those people who ignore the desire for those people for answers, I think they're looking for answers, right? And I'm going to shift onto politics here right now because, in my mind, in fact, the results of this last federal election in Canada are very bad for the resource sector because we have a minority Liberal government that is basically has a lifeline or needs a lifeline to progressive NDP and Bloc Québécois people who have views on the resource sector that are the antithesis of what modern middle road resource people have. So what's going to happen here is that unless the Conservative Party of Canada at some point is able to address climate change and ask the hard questions, but admit and say to people, you know what, there is an issue here. And we don't have all the answers, but here are the answers that we think we need to move in that direction. The political reality of it, Todd, in Canada today is that unless the Conservative Party of Canada moves and gets support in Ontario and gets support in Quebec, but Ontario is more important in terms of numbers. Quebec is nice to have, and it will be good to have. But until the party looks at what's happening on the climate change issue and comes forward with concrete questions that address it, it's going to be in the Netherlands forever. And so what's going to happen is the progressive march in the direction that you and I and Frank don't want to see it go is going to continue unabated. And to me, that's the biggest challenge on the political spectrum right now, is making the Conservative Party moving in a direction that actually can adapt, understand, and propose sentiment or ideas that are at least addressing some of what we see that's out there. Because if we close our minds to that, we're just going to get past.
And you said it very well. I think there's a couple issues, to be honest, the Conservative Party needs to tackle head on, and this being one of them. And it's whether it's progressive conservative or it's adapting to change, but it's finding compromise, and that's actually been my biggest frustration with politics, and it sort of across the spectrum really is that it creates a divide because one side is usually so stuck on their ways on one thing, and the other on the reverse, on the other extreme, and that can never work. And that's why I say this isn't about to say, hey, how inspirational it is what a Greta Thunberg is doing and getting a voice out there. But to me, it's about finding compromise through it all. Are these same, children who are rallying around this. Really, it's a beautiful movement, I'm got to say, against climate change, or for climate change, rather.
I think the issue.
Hang on, Frank. Let me just finish. But whose parents are still driving cars? Who's still fueling up with gas on the way to daycares? Who's still flying jets from country to country to promote So there's just so many things here that if we really want to be truthful about it, we got to be truthful. And that's what I focus on here on the show. I'm actually somewhere in the middle and kind of party agnostic, best person for the job in a way. And right now what I'm seeing is no one really being the best for any job because no one is being factual. They are only what's doing in the comedy world we now call clapter, which is appeasing an audience by saying things that make people not necessarily laugh at a joke, but clap because they're rallying behind it. And I just want to get people not to do clapter on political issues, but actually understand them. And I feel like that's the biggest lost cause with this younger generation, and perhaps strategically done by the political parties themselves. And I hope we can improve on that. Frank, jump in.
I think here the issue is that the Conservative Party is being, has been defined by opposition when we get to the environment topic. And environment should be a conservative topic. It should be one of the pillar of the movement. We want to conserve. Like one thing that people, like not many people seem to remember, one of the prime minister that expand the most national park in Canada is Stephen Harper. And there was good things that were done, for example, with water protection, stuff like that. But we're always shy because there's a small base, a few radical deniers that tend to circle around the party and just in fear of losing them. And I suspect that they represent a very small percentage of the base of the party. But in fear of losing them, we didn't have a leader so far that's able to show some backbone and tell them, sorry, but this is a problem. We have to address it, but we're going to address it with conservative value, with conservative principle. That means a few things. If you look, for example, at the carbon tax that's being proposed or being put in place right now, on paper, and academics will tell you it's the best way to change behavior. It's through tax. It's true on paper. Then you put the human factor in it, and things get corrupt. And to really work, we would have to say, okay, this carbon tax, that's around $20 right now. We're going to need it at $400 per ton, probably by 2025, to actually meet some of the objective of the Paris agreement. That's just a burden on people that try to eat their house, that try to just drive to work, and like that already are struggling, that already are budgeting paycheck to paycheck, while we let go the big polluter and we still dump sewage in the ocean, which contribute to the acidification of the ocean. And the oceans are a big sponge of carbon also. So, we have to look at this globally. One thing that the Conservatives did good, I think, was to say we have to go and spend in other countries, because there we can have a bigger impact, develop technology. But I'll go one step further, because you both talk about Greta. Greta comes with a movement that talks about an urgency, a crisis. They call it a climate crisis. And they talk about a consensus of scientists. Now, I hate that, because in science, you either have the right answer or you don't. There's no such, it's not a democracy, it's not a vote, it's not a consensus. You could have Copernic was right, and there was a consensus of other scientists back in the days that were convinced that the planet was not round, that it was we had a flat Earth, and so it's the same thing here. All the computer models so far have been wrong when they try to predict climate change. But it also goes both ways. That means that we might be 5 minutes from a massive climate crisis. It could also be 200 years from a crisis. Do we want to put people in the street? Do we want to choke people out just for the risk of being closer and farther from that crisis? And if we want an insurance against that imminent problem, well, let's just do active. Let's start to invest in active, solutions. Let's start to take out carbon out of the atmosphere directly. And the only people that can do that usually is a government, or because it's not something we're going to figure out how to make profitable for a business. Nobody's going to buy liquid carbon or is going to buy solid carbon at this point, not for the price that it costs to extract it from the atmosphere. But there's certain things we can do today, and for example, move from industrial farm beef to actually biological or organic beef, and give access to the farmers to federal land where they can graze and they don't have to confine them. Same thing with pork, where we have a problem of concentration of methane. And if you let them graze naturally, if you do organic pork, you actually help the environment and you reduce the carbon footprint. A federal law against spam email would be a good start. We could take a few million in North America. We would be able to take a few million equivalent cars off the street by reducing drastically spam email.
Isn't that interesting? Just by the energy based alone that takes to send it?
Yeah,
that's
the energy
unreal.
that you spend with the computer, the transfer, the server, and all that.
My good, never thought about that. Isn't that amazing? That is seriously amazing to think of when you bring it back to tech and all that waste of energy that gets in everybody's inboxes day in and day out.
I'm going to say something that might put Rick, on the spot a bit because he's an ex-Conservative Party leadership candidate. But I think that what we need is somebody that first have a backbone, that also can reach out, to people that, want to see future. They want to see a positive platform, not something that's defined by opposition to something else. And we need pragmatic solutions. We need to be credible on the climate and environment front.
And listen, I couldn't agree with you guys more where what I'm learning here is we need to find solutions, but we can't just shout. And that's what I'm trying to say. We need to really find these solutions without just shouting at people and scaring people away, making this an extreme issue as opposed to a together issue. And by the way, while we do it, be sensitive of the jobs on the grounds, of the people and the families who have been in the mining and oil and gas industry for quite some time, because you can't just ignore a certain sector while you're shouting for change. And that's where it comes to. I'm very supportive of change, but doing it right. So Rick, I bring it back to you, Rick Peterson, as a former leadership candidate for the Conservative Party. Is there a way that the Conservative Party can approach this and with Scheer still being the guy, is it just sort of another few years of kind of wasting maybe some progressive, real, progressive and aggressive thinking?
It goes beyond the leadership. I mean, Andrew's the leader, and he won fair and square the leadership race. And, in April, party members will have a chance to make a decision on whether he's the right person or not. But bigger than that is the actual party, and that is grassroots, each individual riding across Canada. When it comes to taking stock of where we need to go, we do need, and it's very clear, we do need a party that is more open, progressive on the social issues, understands that the conversation on climate change is one that we've been shut out of voluntarily, and we need to grow, we need to expand, we need to open up. And I think that over the next couple, weeks and months, we'll see what direction the party wants to go, the leadership wants to go. But the frightening thing, Todd, to me, is that if you look at Frank touched on a great point. I mean, Brian Mulroney was the first person on a political leadership basis to attack the acid rain, which was an issue, and Mr. Harper expanding on the parks. And I think that one of the things that we've done poorly as conservatives is we've done a poor job to brand, even on this carbon tax issue. Todd, think about this. The issue of putting a price on carbon, that's a conservative issue. Frank mentioned it. Putting a price on carbon, that's the market. That's the market deciding what the price of being a producer of carbon should be. And that was a conservative notion. The Liberals have taken that, and they now own that. And what we own as conservatives is the issue of carbon tax. We look at it as a tax, and conservatives don't like taxes. But the Liberals have done a good job of taking a conservative idea, and now they own it. And they're hitting back very strongly in the last election about, carbon pricing being free under the Conservatives. And the Conservatives are stuck with this carbon tax issue. So we have to break out of that. And the interesting thing of living here in Alberta, and again, if you go to our suitsandboots.ca, we've got this face-to-face Canadian tour. One of the interesting things is there was a gentleman named Markham Hislop at our Vancouver event, and he pointed out, and here's a guy from Vancouver Island, which is the heart of the green sector in Canadian politics, Todd, as I'm sure you know. He said, the oil sands producers deserve to get a pipeline built. And we all kind of looked at him. Here's a guy from Vancouver Island and relatively known to be left of center. And he said, no. He said, the oil sands producers have been at the forefront of any technology that's improved and reduced carbon emissions. And it's true, they are, right? And the work in technology that they have been doing, and the heavy emitters are being taxed. And even here in Alberta, there is a provincial tax on heavy emitters. So there is a carbon tax in Alberta. It's under the heavy emitters. What conservatives need to do is we need to move ourselves and to approach this question of pricing on carbon and doing it in a way that's effective, that people can see. But on the other hand, if you're a plumber or a welder up in Fort St. John and you're driving your Ford 150 truck to work every day, you don't have an electrical vehicle choice, so you should not pay a carbon tax, right?
Yep.
So there is a tremendous amount of room, and I'm just going to come back to the Michael Chong, who was one of our colleagues and was elected again as a strong MP. And, Michael was very, very forceful in coming out with a carbon tax that was really the Cadillac of all carbon tax proposals, where he talked about, the heavy emitters and the individuals. And, it was interesting to see. He didn't get traction on it, but there is a wide field that's wide open for conservatives right now that finds elements of the approach to carbon pricing and marrying it with a progressive, open approach to a whole bunch of other issues. But carbon pricing is a conservative issue, and we got to move back to owning that issue. We have to move it back and talk about the carbon issue being one where the markets will decide, but make the emitters pay, and don't make people who don't contribute to it pay. So that's where I think we have to go.
Rick, would you ever consider running again in the Conservative Party?
Oh, that's not a question I'm even entertaining right now. We'll wait and see what happens down the road. But I'm going to be active as a conservative. But the most fun I'm having right now, Todd, is with Suits and Boots. If you look at Suits and Boots,
in 2 sentences or less, why should people go to suitsandboots.ca and sort of just let's culminate this entire interview, put it together.
You got it. Thanks, Todd. Grassroots group across Canada of individual people who are supportive of the resource sector, but open to listening and learning all points of view and getting stuff done. We're going to publish our 10 recommendations on the first day of the Conservative Convention in Toronto on April 20th. So we're doing what no think tank is doing, no corporation is doing, no government is doing, and we're financed by $10 and $20 donations of people across Canada. So we're original, we're doing good work, and on the first day of the Conservative Convention, you're going to see the results of our efforts.
Listen, I got to tell you, as an individual, really tries to live his life by finding compromise, and it's not always easy because I find it within myself daily when I wake up, as opposed to just doing something with complete conviction, which usually leads to BS. But for me, I'm a questioner. I'm almost like a I don't know, I was going to say like a philosopher. I get deep with stuff. And this to me is very important. And I think very important for your entire party to understand, recognize, and hopefully even get behind. It's being very open to these questions, and it's being very open to change while figuring out, I think what you're saying, Rick and Frank, is finding a compromise. Bootsandsuits.ca. Really interesting, and I will definitely study it more and promote it whenever you need help.
Thanks, Todd. There's Suits before the Boots, suitsandboots.ca. But thank you for a thoughtful interview. This is great.
Did I say boots and suits?
You did. That's okay.
Hey, listen, I'm in Vegas, Rick.
Rick,
can you catch me some slack? I'm in Vegas, okay, bud?
Yeah, I'll back you out. Thanks so much, Frank. Thank you as well, okay?
Yeah, Rick, let's talk down the line. I'll be up in Edmonton, too, in a couple of months, so we have family down there. So let's get in touch.
Look forward to it. Wait until the weather warms up, okay? Stay in Vegas.
No doubt. We're usually there at the worst time. Okay. Thanks, buddy. And Frank Dumas, thank you so much, and happy to hear there's some progress with CU, and just always great to hear your big brain putting great interviews together for Frank's friends. And we got a big one tomorrow, don't we?
Well, I'm not sure. Let's see if it happens.
Hey, in radio, we sell, and if it doesn't happen, we say there are technical difficulties.
Let's say if it's not big tomorrow, it's going to be big on Thursday night.
Yeah. No, listen, John McAfee is set to join us tomorrow, and he's a very busy guy. He's sort of always, here and there, and but he has committed through email, and that is enough for us to promote it. And Frank's a big reason why that's happening, and you'll be on with us, Frank Dumas and John McAfee tomorrow. Frank, thanks for that interview. That was really neat. I learned a little bit more as I went on. I didn't necessarily get that out of their website, what their purpose was, and it's nice to see a search for doing stuff better while remaining true to your beliefs.
Rick is a wealth of knowledge, and also he's a pragmatic. So he has a tendency also to bring me down from the cloud. Sometimes when I have a crazy idea, he's always asking me, who's going to scratch a check? Who's going to pay for this? Find a client before you develop something. That's a very pragmatic guy, very bright guy, a lot of experience, fluent in French and English. That's awesome. But he's also one of the guys from the West that made me realize that every time that there's a fracture or a schism in Canada where East and West are put, each against another, somebody profits, and it's never the Canadian citizen. So it's we need to talk. The Eastern Canada needs to talk to Western Canada. We need to create more links. We need to create more business and lift each other.
Well said, my man. It's a phrase that I live by these days more than ever, is that rising tide lifts all boats, and let's, as Canadians, try and lift each other. It's very important, and I hope we stop shouting at each other, which is my biggest fear, that we're turning into what I'm noticing here in the States more than anything, divide, and that's the last thing I want for our people, which is why I try to find it from a point of view that does bring us together. And while people sometimes don't like that, they just assume you're a climate change denier, which is ridiculous in my mind. It's about asking the hard questions to figure out how we can actually get stuff done. Thank you again, Frank.
Thank you, Todd.
Okay, cheers.
This is the Todd Shapiro Show on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.